Want the freshest cup of coffee in Gettysburg? Then visit 82 Cafe at 82 Steinway Avenue. They roast all of their coffee in-house and have a full coffee bar to keep you caffeinated during your visit. Check them out at www.raggededgerc.com for their menu and shipping options and their freshly roasted coffee. Use promo code Hancock for 10% off your order. That's 82 Cafe at 82 Steinway Avenue across from the Dobbin House or raggededgerc.com.
The 1863 civilians of Gettysburg were reluctant witnesses to the Great Battle. Join Ken Rich, the man in the red shirt, for his historic town walking tours. You could book these tours by emailing ken@gettysburgtownhistory.com. That's ken@gettysburgtownhistory.com. And when you're in town, look for the guy in the red shirt.
Enjoy historical stories on the History Fix platform. Explore movies, short films, and documentaries. Addressing Gettysburg podcast fans receive an extra $5 off the first year's annual subscription. Sign up at historyfix.com and use promo code Gettysburg. Every subscription includes a 7-day risk-free trial. Escape into history with History Fix.
This episode of Addressing Gettysburg is brought to you in part by me, audiobook narrator Mike Scott, narrator of Savis Beattie's Bloody Autumn, the Shenandoah Valley Campaign of 1864, and Unlike Anything That Ever Floated, the Monitor and Virginia and the Battle of Hampton Roads. If you are an author or publisher interested in having your titles produced as audiobooks, or even just in learning more about the process, give me a shout. You can find my contact info on my website, MikeScottVoice.com. That's MikeScottVoice.com.
And Civil War Trails. It's the world's largest open-air museum, and they offer over 1,300 sites across 6 states. Drive the Gettysburg campaign turn by turn, paddle to Frederick Douglass's birthplace, or hike to remote earthworks and artillery positions. Visit civilwartrails.org to request a brochure and explore their interactive map. Follow Civil War Trails and create some history of your own. All free episodes of Addressing Gettysburg are brought to you by our sponsors and our patrons over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. To become a sponsor, send an email to matt@addressinggettysburg.com. And to be a patron, go to patreon.com/addressinggettysburg today. And we thank you in advance.
Testing. Can you hear me? Fine. Sounds like the volume is good. Too loud or okay? All right. Well, welcome to the 2023 Winter Lecture Series. And thank you. Yes. So good to be with you today. And I just got up today and just felt thrilled. I thought, okay, I get to go in and talk to Gettysburg. And these good people are nice enough to be there. And we're going to have some great lectures this winter. There's one of them that's on identifying the exact spot where Abraham Lincoln spoke. And I've heard rumors that when he takes you out on tours, he puts down 4 ribbons to the exact spot, and you get to stand right there where Lincoln stood. So we'll get it started here today with Culp's Hill Intelligence Gathering. And I have over 90 slides, so I have to keep them moving at a clip. And there are times where I'm going to be tempted to stop and elaborate, but I'm just going to keep it moving so you can see the whole thing. And then we can elaborate in future programs or conversations afterwards. And Culp's Hill, you know, Greg Coco told me years ago. Some of you know Greg Coco. He passed away a few years ago, and he's a legend here. He was a licensed guide and a ranger. And he's written a number of excellent books, Strange and Blighted Land, Vast Sea of Misery. He was really the expert on the aftermath of the battle, and his books are still ongoing, the best that there is in that area. And he was a Vietnam veteran. And he told me, before he passed away, he said, Troy, he said, if you stay in front of the public and you stay interested in the subject matter, he said, your attention will eventually shift to the Union right flank and to the Culp's Hill area, because it's more complex. He said Little Round Top and Cemetery Ridge on the Union left and left center, he said, that's pretty direct. But he said when you go over to the right flank, the Union right flank, you have all of these areas that are in recesses and are relatively unknown. Not just Culp's Hill, but Spangler Hill and McAllister Ridge, McAllister Hill, Powers Hill, Wolf Walk Ridge, Wolf Hill, Benner's Hill, Hospital Hill, Brinkerhoff Ridge, Cress's Ridge. And then he said from Blacksmith Shop Road to Sachs Road, Blacksmith Shop Road south to Hospital Road to Sachs Road, you have 5 miles of Union hospitals. in order from north to south, 11th, 12th, 3rd, 5th, and 2nd Corps hospitals. And that's all on the Union right flank, and it's broken up by woods, and the Union Army's main water supply, Rock Creek, is over there. That's why all the hospitals were in that area. That's where there are rail connections to the outside world that eventually brought Lincoln to the battlefield, and all the care packages from all over the north and the nurses corps and all came in by that part of the battlefield. It's really complicated over there. It takes years to try to wrap your mind around it. So we're going to focus, though, more on Culp's Hill intelligence gathering today. And so that's more of a narrow focus to make it manageable. We have with us Matt Callery is here in the audience, and he has an excellent podcast program. How many of you have heard of Matt and his Addressing Gettysburg? He's a rising star in this park. He's done some amazing things already, and I listened to his voice. I've had the good fortune a couple times to be involved with him in different things, and he's big time. So go to Addressing Gettysburg and be in on the cutting edge of somebody that's rising and gaining a name, and he has excellent content. Addressing Gettysburg is also is recording here today. Now, Culp's Hill intelligence gathering. Let's get right into it. Why should it surprise that the Southern Army scoped out Culp's Hill? It would make sense that Lee reconnoitered Culp's Hill at Gettysburg, so why would we think otherwise? Coddington stirred false impressions that Lee was inactive at Gettysburg. Edwin Coddington, in his seminal work 55 years ago, stated that supervision was hardly the word to have used in describing Lee's activities on the afternoon of the evening of July 2nd. While the battle raged, he sent only one message and received only one report by courier. Coddington continued, as soon as the firing began, Lee joined Hill and Heath near the seminary, which was equally accessible to Longstreet and Ewell, and stayed there nearly all the time during the battle. Now and then, Lee would change his position from one stump to another. And this is really important because Coddington impacted just about everything that followed for decades, and Coddington is still the standard. And articles that you've read and books that you think are not related to Coddington, they've drawn from Coddington. So he started this idea that Lee sat on a stump and was very inactive, and that's part of the beginnings of the notion that the Confederates attacked Culp's Hill without any planning, without any forethought, without any scoping, without any intelligence gathering. Edward Porter Alexander also stirred false impressions that Lee was inactive at Gettysburg. Alexander, he was the artillery chief, acting artillery chief for the third day of the battle in Pickett's charge and Longstreet's corps. And he would write, scarcely any of our generals had half of what they needed to keep a constant and close supervision on the execution of important orders. And this would be his discussion, Alexander's discussion on how Lee had a limited staff. Lee didn't have an expansive staff. And it's because of Orders 191 in the Antietam campaign. His orders were captured, found in a cigar wrapping around a campfire, 27th Indiana, 13th New Jersey, found it. From that point on, Lee was once bitten, twice shy to ever write down a written order. That's why when you go through the official records, they were declassified in the late 1880s and published for the veterans to write their memoirs. It's called the ORs, or the official reports. You go through it and you find few orders that Lee gave. It's because he gave a lot of orders here verbally. He was once bitten, twice shy. He didn't want to write something and then it be found and his plans be uncovered. The Battle of Antietam occurred where it did because of discovering that cigar wrapper with his orders on it. So Alexander, what Lee did here at Gettysburg was he had a limited staff, just a small group of people that he trusted. If you have a large staff that's very active, it can follow up on everything immediately. You also have a few people that might turn on you in the process. And there's more room for people to be captured and mistakes to be made and your orders to be caught. But Alexander gave the impression that Lee was inactive, inattentive with the use of his scouts here at Gettysburg. False impressions aside, how did the Southern Army gather information about Culp's Hill? By the way, if you're interested in where Robert E. Lee was all during the battle. I did a program a few years ago for a seminar, and the park published it. You can find it online. It's Your Tax Dollars at Work. But look it up. It says something, the title is something to the effect of Lee rode up right to where I was standing. It's a PDF, and it's on the Library of Congress website. It's free. And it was a very interesting program and paper, because I found that Lee popped up like Waldo on the back of a cereal box in the strangest places. I mean, I imagined him just shifting around on a stump as Coddington had him at the seminary. Instead, he was just about everywhere. If you read the reports and you read the accounts, he shows up in the oddest places at the oddest times. So false impressions aside, how was information about Culp's Hill gathered? Jedediah Hotchkiss visited 5 months prior to the battle. This is the beginning of gathering information about Culp's Hill and really the entire battlefield. Southern reconnaissance began with Jedediah Hotchkiss' scouting mission to Gettysburg 5 months prior to the battle. Jedediah Hotchkiss traveled parts of 3 states in utmost secrecy in February 1863, that's roughly 5 months before the battle, to examine terrain and collect county maps. His scouting mission resulted in Lee's Gettysburg campaign map. This is the map. This is what Lee had on him all during the battle. It was put together by Hotchkiss. It was from New York. He didn't have a southern accent, so no one up here suspected him when he came to south central Pennsylvania and went from courthouse to courthouse and gathered their county maps, including the 1858 Adams County map for this area. And then pieced them together and made a much broader map of parts of 3 states. The lower part here would be, that would be Virginia, and then up through Maryland and into Pennsylvania. And you can see Gettysburg right in the middle, like a spider with all of its roads. You can see that the railroads, Cumberland Valley Railroad, and then over here the Northern Central Line. Those would be the things that Lee's army would target and tear up so that the Union Army wouldn't be able to have modern forms of transportation and communication during the Gettysburg battle. They would be reduced to horse and wagons for supply like he was. But Lee had it all mapped out months before the battle. And Culp's Hill, of course, would be part of that. This is a close-up of the Gettysburg area. Hotchkiss identified thousands of surnames on his map with an accompanying chart of Southern sympathizers. Now this picture, I went with a Gettysburg volunteer down to Hanley Public Library in Winchester, Virginia, and that's where the original map is that I showed you in the previous frame, showing parts of 3 states. And they wouldn't take it out from behind the glass, and it was that opaque glass. It's old 19th century glass, and so it wasn't very clear. They wouldn't take the map out so we could get closer photographs for a publication. They said you can take as many as you like and see if any turn out. So we took 50 photographs, and this was one of 3 that wasn't too blurry that we put in a publication. But this is the kind of detail that Lee had access to. As we talk about intelligence gathering, we're looking at real big picture now. Before the Confederates ever got here, Union got here, Lee had a scout come to this area and check out the entire area. Again, there is an accompanying chart showing in parts of 3 states where there are Southern sympathizers, or those that show sympathy towards the South. And you can almost measure where Lee was going to go during the battle just by the map. If you go too far west on the larger map I showed you in the previous frame, if you go too far west, you fall off the edge of the cliff of the world over here. That's Shippensburg area there, and then further to the west, if you go beyond York, you're not in Philadelphia. You do have Baltimore and Washington down in the lower corner. So these are all possibilities. But Lee wanted to know the roads, the water sources, and the rail before the invasion even began. Early, this is Jubal Early, entered Gettysburg 5 days before the main battle. We're working our way from very broad to more specific as we talk about intelligence gathering now. Confederate Major General Jubal Early observed Culp's Hill on June 26, 1863. That's 5 days before the main battle. Early wrote, and this was a meeting that he attended with Lee and several other officers the night of July 1st at the Blocker Farm near Barlow's Knoll, north of Gettysburg. Early wrote, I was the first to speak, for I had examined more thoroughly and critically than the others the enemy's position east of Gettysburg, extending along Cemetery Hill and the adjacent heights to Culp's Hill, as my 2 brigades immediately confronted it, and peculiarly my duty to do so. Moreover, I had been in Gettysburg the week before. Now, this is his reference to coming through here on the 26th, when there was no enemy there, and had noticed the general character of the surrounding country. So he let it be known in this meeting with Lee and others that he was already familiar with the area from several days earlier. Plus, his brigades were the ones that would be called the pursuit brigades at the end of the first day of the battle, and they were facing Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill. Early also wrote, I was soon given to understand that General Lee's purpose was to ascertain our condition, what we knew of the enemy, his position, and what we could probably do next day. The purport of what I said was that the ground over which we would have to advance on our flank was very rugged and steep. My oh my, is Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill ever rugged and steep? That the enemy was then evidently concentrating and fortifying in our immediate front. Some of you know that the Iron Brigade, 24th Michigan, 19th Indiana, 2nd, 7th Wisconsin, 6th Wisconsin was digging in on Stevens Knoll, adjacent to Culp's Hill, the night of the 1st. They were also, the 11th Corps was felling trees on Cemetery Hill the night of the 1st of the battle, fortifying in our immediate front, and by the morning would probably have the greater part of his force concentrated on that flank and the position strongly fortified, as ours were the only troops confronting him in close proximity. So right here, the Southerners are revealing that they knew that Culp's Hill was being fortified. Occasionally you'll hear someone say, well, the Southerners attacked Culp's Hill and they didn't know what they were getting into, and they didn't even, if they had known it was entrenched and impossible, they would have never made the attack. Here's Jubal Early telling you that they knew that at the end of the first day. That it was, and of course they could hear trees falling, and the 11th Corps and elements of the 1st Corps, Wadsworth's division, chopping down trees on Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill. So they knew what they were getting into. How did the Southern Army obtain specifics? Let us further break down how this intelligence was first gathered and then added to before the Confederate assault of Culp's Hill on July 2nd, 1863. Southern cavalry first approached Culp's Hill June 26, 1863. So we're still big picture here. Lieutenant Colonel Elijah V. White, White's Comanches, 35th Virginia Battalion, Virginia Cavalry, first entered Gettysburg on June 26th, engaging scattered Federal cavalry along the surrounding environs of Culp's Hill. White's Comanches, 35th Battalion, Virginia Cavalry, pursued the 21st Pennsylvania Volunteer Cavalry Regiment down the Baltimore Pike to Culp's Hill on June 26, 1863. So this is 5 days before the battle. Confederate cavalry was in the environs of Culp's Hill. Private George Washington Sandow, Company B, 21st Pennsylvania Volunteer Cavalry, was mortally wounded right across from Culp's Hill, between there and Powers Hill, just south of us, by the 35th Battalion Virginia Cavalry. Private George Washington Sandow was the first Union soldier killed at Gettysburg, and there's a marker to him just south of Culp's Hill along the Baltimore Pike. And there's Anna Caskey Sandow and George Washington Sandow, recently married. And he is buried at Mount Joy Lutheran Church Cemetery. Some of you know Deborah Sandow McCausland. Okay, she's in direct relation of this family and this gentleman who was killed on June 26th in the initial clash with Jubal Early's troops entering Gettysburg. This is the view that members of White's Comanches had when they spotted Private Sandow along the Baltimore Pike. Culp's Hill is to the left Spangler Meadows in the foreground, Wolf Hills in the back. This is McAllister. This is actually McAllister Ridge here. So that view was had 5 days before the battle. And we're going to see how all these pieces come together as the Confederates were gradually gathering information about Culp's Hill. This is a modern view of the same area. Thanks to recent tree clearing within the last 15 years, you now have that view. You can stand along the Baltimore Pike, not far from where we are, and you can see Spangler Meadow, Culp's Hill, Wolf Hill, and then this is McAllister Ridge. This was my attempt to do a pano. I stood out there with a camera, you know, and it's sort of, the proportions are a little bit off, but it gives you an idea of the area. This is the Nathaniel Leitner Farm along the Baltimore Pike. You and I are right over here. We're in the visitor center right now, so it's not far from us. Nathaniel Leitner Farm, and this is Powers Hill, and then you can see elements here of Wolf Hill. Again, the proportions are off because of my attempt at a pano. And then this is Culp's Hill, this is Spangler Meadow, and this is Leitner Ridge. It could also be called McAllister Ridge. Scouting party sent to Culp's Hill evening of July 1st. A Confederate scouting party ascended Culp's Hill after dark on July 1. As we continue to talk about intelligence gathering, the Southerners knew what they were getting into when they attacked Culp's Hill. There's this long, steady stream we're looking at of intelligence gathering. Confederate scouting party to Culp's Hill. Now, in the ORs, Richard Ewell, who commanded 1/3 of Robert E. Lee's Southern Army here, and whose troops faced Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill, wrote in his after-action report, "Cemetery Hill was not assailable from the town." That's because the streets were so narrow. This is long before the automobile. It was a walking city. Streets were narrow. That's why you have one-way streets, because they were originally not designed with the automobile in mind. Gettysburg's the same way. Very narrow streets. You can't form lines of battle in the town. And if you fire artillery into the town, if you're the Union Army and you're firing artillery off Cemetery Hill down into the town, the buildings break up the fire. So the Confederates could anchor into cellars and attics and lodge in the town, where they would stay for a better part of 2 days. So Ewell knew that Union guns on Cemetery Hill were frowning down on the town. He couldn't form the lines of battle in the narrow streets, and that's what he's talking about. Cemetery Hill is not assailable from the town. By the way, the reason Pickett's charge occurred where it did, it was the only place to get at Cemetery Hill without having to go through the town. That's why Pickett's charge came in at the oblique. Reverse direction. Cemetery Hill was not assailable from the town, and I determined with Johnson's division to take possession of a wooded hill. What's wooded hill? Yeah, the Southerners call Culp's Hill the wooded hill, to my left, and on a line with and commanding Cemetery Hill. That's why the Southerners attacked Culp's Hill for 2 days, for 12 hours. Second longest fighting of the war, second only to the Muleshoe. In 4 years of war, the second longest period of time, ammunition used, energy levels used, manpower used, over the same bit of ground, locked for 12 and a half hours. Pickett's charge was 45 minutes. Devil's Den, maybe 2 hours, Little Round Top 2.5 hours. Culp's Hill was 12 and a half hours. 12 and a half hours. And the only reason the Confederates attacked Culp's Hill is they felt like it was, well, let's say the tactical reason was it made Cemetery Hill unattainable. So that's the importance of it in the broader scheme. And we could go more into that, and I'm tempted to, but we got to keep moving here. Before Johnson got up, the enemy was reported moving to outflank our extreme left. And I could see what seemed to be skirmishers in that direction. That's Ruger's brigade, Thomas Ruger's brigade, 13th New Jersey, 27th Indiana, 2nd Massachusetts, 3rd Wisconsin, 107th New York. They wore a red star on the hat. 1st Division, 12th Corps marched from Littlestown to 2 taverns to Gettysburg in 1 day to come up on the 11th Corps right. And they marched up Benner's Hill and what would later be called Hospital Hill to threaten Ewell's flank. That was the primary reason why the Confederate pursuit of the Union 11th Corps through the town to Cemetery Hill stopped, because the 12th Corps showed up on their flank. And Ewell tells us that he watched the 49th Virginia Company D and White's Comanche skirmish with them. He's telling you that right here. That's why the Confederates didn't attack Cemetery Hill. The 12th Corps showed up on their left flank and gave the impression of a much larger force. Before this report could be investigated by Lieutenant T.T. Turner, notice that name, aide-de-camp of my staff, and Lieutenant Robert D. Early, sent for that purpose, and Johnson placed in position, the night was far advanced. And then he goes on to tell you that I received orders soon after dark to draw my corps to the right, in case it could not be used to advantage where it was. That the commanding general, that's Lee, thought the nature of the ground position for attack was a good one on that side. I represented to the commanding general that the hill above referred to was unoccupied by the enemy. That's Culp's Hill. By the enemy, as reported by Lieutenants Turner and Early. And he tells you there that both of these officers had gone up upon it. So I don't know if you knew this, but Southerners actually were on top of Culp's Hill the evening of the 2nd, just like Samuel Johnston claimed to have been up on Little Round Top on July 2nd on behalf of the Confederates in their scouting before attacking the Union left in the Round Tops, Wheatfield, Peach Orchard. In the same way, Robert Early and Turner told Ewell that they made it on top of Culp's Hill, and that it commanded that position, that's Cemetery Hill, and made Cemetery Hill untenable so far as I could judge. Then he goes on to say that General Johnson, this was Edward Allegheny Johnson, stated in reply to this order that after forming his line of battle, this side of the wooded hill in question, that's Culp's Hill, Johnson commanded about 6,000 troops. They made a forced march to get to Gettysburg to be in preparation to attack Culp's Hill. The reason why General Lee told Ewell to seize the heights south of town if practicable without bringing on a general engagement, that's where people usually crop off the order, but the rest of the order says, or until reinforcements arrive. Ewell decided to wait for Johnson to arrive. Johnson had to get around wagon trains on the Chambersburg Pike. He dropped into an unfinished railroad cut at 7 Stars. Local people said, we do that all the time to avoid paying the toll. Followed the railroad cut and got around A.P. Hill's wagon trains where the traffic jams were between here and Cashtown along the Chambersburg Pike. Climbed up out of the cut on McPherson Ridge on the first day's battlefield. And then followed the rail line on around to Benner's Hill, east of Gettysburg. So Johnson says once he got into position, then that meant Ewell could continue the attack. In those days, they didn't have daylight saving time. It was dark at 7 o'clock. Johnson got here, even with his innovative dropping in a cut and bypassing traffic. He still didn't get opposite Culp's Hill, a little place called Benner's Hill, in preparation to attack until around 7 p.m. But Johnson stated that after forming his line of battle, this side of Wooded Hill in question, that would be on Benner's Hill facing Culp's Hill, he sent a reconnoitering party to Culp's Hill with orders to report as to the position of the enemy in reference to it. This party, on nearing the summit, was met by a superior force of the enemy, which succeeded in capturing a portion of the reconnoitering party, the rest of it making its escape. So Johnson made a follow-up reconnaissance, in addition to Early and Turner being up there, probably around 5 p.m. Closer to 7 p.m., Johnson sent these 20-plus scouts to the top of Culp's Hill. They got up there, and the 7th Indiana of Cutler's brigade was there and captured probably 20 of them, maybe 2 or 3 escaped. And like taking a log flume at Hershey Park, the Confederates slid down, the 3 that escaped, 2-3 that escaped, slid down the north face of Culp's Hill and ran back in the direction of Benner's Hill to report that the area was occupied. The reason why the Confederates didn't attack Culp's Hill before dark is this scouting mission revealed that it was occupied. You would say, well, it's only the 7th Indiana. Well, in the dark, instead of 700 men, it might as well be 7,000 men. It's occupied. So there are factors as to why the rebels didn't attack that night. It has to do with reconnaissance, and hopefully this is beneficial to you in that way. During the conversation with General Johnson, it says, one man arrived bringing a dispatch. This is one of the men that escaped from Culp's Hill, dated at 12 midnight, and taken from a federal courier, making his way from General Sykes to General Slocum, which the former, that Sykes, stated his corps was then halted 4 miles from Gettysburg, and he would resume his march at 4 a.m. Lieutenant Turner brought this dispatch to that's Ewell's headquarters, and at the same time stated that General Johnson would refrain from attacking Culp's Hill until I had received notice of the fact that the enemy, that's the 7th Indiana and the Iron Brigade, were in possession of the hill and had sent him further orders. So all of this information was processed. That's why Ewell didn't attack the hill. Notice too the part that I've highlighted in green. This tells you that the 2 or 3 men that escaped from being captured by the 7th Indiana on Culp's Hill, on their way back to Benner's Hill, they ran into a Union courier. This is the danger of having a large staff now. And he had papers on him from Sykes, the 5th Corps commander, commanding 10,000 troops. They had marched 58 miles in 3 days from Frederick to get there, and they were coming up on the Union right flank near Culp's Hill. They were only 4 miles from there, a place called Bonneville today. They called it Bonnetown back then. And I'm sure Ewell felt tingles up his spine when he read that not only was Culp's Hill occupied, but the 2 or 3 men that escaped ran into a courier representing Sykes with papers to give to Slocum, the right-wing commander, announcing that 10,000 Union troops, the 5th Corps, was only 4 miles from the battlefield. That would also mean that Jeb Stuart's cavalry wasn't protecting the flank. So that's all the more reason not to attack Culp's Hill. There's a lot of information being gathered here, and including the Southerners actually being on the hill twice the evening of the 1st. And these are markers nearby 2nd Wisconsin Infantry entrenchments, approximately 100 yards from where much of Johnson's scouting party was captured. This is an Edwin Forbes sketch of the main fortifications along the eastern slope, built by Green's Brigade. This is the 7th Indiana Infantry Monument. Johnson's scouting party was discovered here after dark on July 1st by the 7th Indiana Infantry. So they're very instrumental, the 7th Indiana, in preventing the rebels from attacking Culp's Hill the night of the 1st. As we continue to look at intelligence gathering, Lee personally surveyed the Union right in an aerial way. My son's studying he's studying aeronautics now, and he has his drone's license, working on his pilot's license. So proud of him, proud of the fact he flew this morning to Harrisburg International Airport, and he's actually here with us today. And he and I have talked about the importance of surveillance in modern times with drones. And cameras in buildings and satellite imagery. It's amazing the three-dimensional warfare that we have today, and or intelligence gathering via satellite, via GPS, via cams and the like. The equivalent in the Civil War times was to send up a hydrogen balloon or to climb a tower. And so the equivalent of a drone back then would be find the nearest steeple or the nearest cupola and just go up it. And so we have from Isaac Trimble an account of Lee surveying the Union right, the Culp's Hill area, in a drone-like fashion. And this is also good information about the argument over whether Lee's health prevented him from getting around. Clearly, he's climbed a tower to be able to look down on the Culp's Hill area. His heart couldn't have been too bad if he was able to do that. July 2nd, this morning, all was quiet. General Lee, about 9 a.m., said Trimble, rode over to General Ewell's quarters, who was absent. Lee first met me and said he wanted to go to some point which would command a view of the country and the enemy position. That would be like my son sending up a drone. I pointed out the cupola of the almshouse nearby, to which we ascended. From this, we had a good view of Cemetery Hill, Round Top, Culp's Hill, and adjacent country. So Lee would have taken field glasses, we would call them binoculars, and climbed the tower. Culp's Hill straight ahead, taken from Benner's Hill. This is a photograph I took, comparable to Lee's cupola view. And you can see Culp's Hill there from Benner's Hill, where Johnson's troops would eventually attack from towards Culp's Hill. There's Culp's Hill again in the background, and in the foreground you can see the dismantled fence post along the Baltimore Pike the Union 11th Corps used to lace their lunettes and their fortifications that they built on Cemetery Hill to give fiber to their fortifications. They dismantled all the fences along the Baltimore Pike. That's East Cemetery Hill in the foreground.
If you're a lover of history, then go to trhistorical.com. There you'll find apparel, decor, and gear, and our listeners will receive 10% off plus free shipping within the U.S. if you use promo code GBERG1863 at checkout. So take advantage of this deal at trhistorical.com. TR Historical, for the love of history.
For the Historian has a wide variety of titles, new and used, of military books from publishers like Osprey, Gettysburg Publishing, Stackpole, Savas Beatty, UNC Press, and more. I make it a point to go there once a week because I have new bookshelves to fill and I never know what treasures I'll find, and neither will you. They even have toy soldiers, model kits, games, children's books, and more. So stop by and check them out on your next visit to Gettysburg, or better yet, order right now online at forthehistorian.com and mention that you heard about them on Addressing Gettysburg in the Note to Seller box, and they will refund you your shipping. And if you call 717-685-5207 or stop by the store on your next visit and mention us, you'll get 20% off retail price. That's forthehistorian.com or 717-685-5207.
You've heard us promote various ways that you can help us keep the show going, but one way we haven't pushed too much is our sutlery at addressinggettysburg.com/shop. That's a shame because we have designs over there by talented artists like Ty DeWitt of 1863 Designs and Mike Stretch of the Heritage Depot. So now we're promoting it. Buying shirts, hoodies, mugs, and other items from our sutlery not only helps us keep the lights on, but it also helps guys like Ty and Mike, and it helps spread the word about the show every time you wear an item or you sip from your mug. So head over to addressinggettysburg.com/shop and grab some merch. It's the perfect Christmas gift for the Gettys nerd in your family. That's addressinggettysburg.com/shop.
Hey, Gettysburg business owners. Winter is just around the bend, and you know what that means. No tourists. But just because people aren't coming to you doesn't mean you can't bring your business to them. If you ship, you're still in the game. And if you're a seasonal business, the time to advertise for your next season is in the off-season when people are making their plans. So what's an affordable yet highly effective way of reaching those people? Well, it's not radio. It's not TV, and it's certainly not print. Step out of the Jurassic era of advertising and run an ad on Addressing Gettysburg. We just reached 1 million downloads, and we're growing by the tens of thousands every month. Beyond that, our audience is happy to support those who support their favorite podcast. So email sales@addressinggettysburg for more information about advertising on our show. We look forward to helping your business grow. That's sales@addressinggettysburg.com.
White's Comanches returned to examine Culp's Hill's environs on July 2nd. After White's Comanches damaged portions of the Hanover-Gettysburg Railroad toward York between June 26 and June 28, they returned to Gettysburg to guard Ewell's left flank on July 1 and 2. They were ordered to reconnoiter, that is, to scout the Union right around Culp's Hill on the morning of July 2nd. Author Captain Frank Myers, Company A, 35th Battalion, Virginia Cavalry, White's Comanches, wrote a book after the war, Regimental History of the 35th, and the things that they did around Culp's Hill. There's a lot of talk about Lee not having cavalry and so forth. Lee did have the 35th Virginia Cavalry scoping the Union right flank from June 26th up through the morning of July 2nd. Myers describes an expedition that he and one other officer led to the environs of Culp's Hill on July 2nd. So not only did Confederates go to the top of Culp's Hill on the evening of July 1st twice, but then White's Comanches were sent there again on the morning of the 2nd before they even attacked. Company E, White's Comanches. This is a picture taken in 1894. Captain Frank Myers does not appear in this photo, possibly because he served in companies A and E and identified with both. This is a photograph from our museum. If you walk through the museum, you will see this photograph. And the Hanover Road, along with access farm lanes and field roads to Culp's Hill and Baltimore Pike, are shown in this map. The area was patrolled by White's Comanches. Remember I said at the beginning, this part of the battlefield is more complex? It is. And if you hadn't spent time in this part of the battlefield, your eyes could glaze over, you could get lost, or you might just be incredibly intrigued, or a seed might be planted and you return back to the story later. But you can spend years studying these areas that most people never visit. And White's Comanches would scour these areas. This is the Hanover Road, and we're going to visit some places you may never have visited before. The Lady Farm, the Brinkerhoff Farm. This would be the area of the, I don't have it marked, but the Storick Farm, and then the 3rd Pennsylvania Heavy Artillery, all along the Hanover Road. This is the Wolf Hill. It was a huge, almost like a Great Wall of China on that part of the battlefield east of Gettysburg. The reason why there were cavalry battles east of Gettysburg, East Cavalry Field, for instance, Brinkerhoff Ridge, is largely in part because of this wall known as Wolf Hill, double layered by Brinkerhoff Ridge, which secluded and made almost like an island east of town that part of the battlefield, meaning cavalry had to operate east of Wolf Hill at all times so there wouldn't be blindside accesses to the Army's flanks. So that's why cavalry battles would occur out in this area. Also, there was railroad repair going on, and so Union cavalry had to protect and cover the rail repair that was going on behind the lines. There were 400 Union workers repairing rail lines that the Southerners had damaged. White's Comanches had damaged the Hanover-Gettysburg line. And so that repair was going on, and those engineers were working to try to make hardwired links to the battlefield so the Union Army could bring up horses and shoes and supplies, medical supplies. So that was another reason for so much movement with Union cavalry east of Gettysburg. But so let's visit these places then. I want you to also notice, and it's beyond my scope today, but I want you to notice Rock Creek. Every battlefield has a major water source: Antietam Creek, Bull Run, Wilson's Creek, Chickamauga. Gettysburg had Rock Creek. It defined the battlefield as much as Cemetery Ridge did. It's not a coincidence the two are parallel and just a few miles apart. This is the Lady Farm as we go along the Hanover Road, part of where White's Comanches patrolled, gathered information. This is the Brinkerhoff house. It's lived in by Gloria Ann Hutchison, and her son Rick Hutchison lives nearby. If you go out to visit these places, these folks that live there, they're salt of the earth people, and you want to get to know them. Where is Larry and Annette in the group here? Okay, yes, Keener Farley. They are on the board of the Lady Farm, the Gettysburg Battlefield Preservation Association. So you want to work through them if you want to go visit the Lady Farm. The Brinkerhoff house, you want to talk to the Hutchisons. I can tell you how to get in contact with them. The Storick house is a Storick house. He was one of the superintendents of the battlefield in the 1930s, and he was a licensed guy, just an early shaper of the story of the Battle of Gettysburg. He was also a school teacher, and the Storick house is owned today by the Crane family. Here's another overview again, just to bring you back for orientation. You have the Lady Farm. We just saw the Brinkerhoff Farm. The Storick Farm's right in here. We haven't gotten to the 3rd Heavy Artillery, but it's out here. Also, we're going to begin to look at some of these roads here, like Highland Avenue Road. These are lesser known roads on the battlefield. White Run Road. The whole 5th Corps marched to Gettysburg on this road. White Run Road. This is Low Dutch Road. And out of your view, Two Taverns Road. Very important roads. The reason why Union Cavalry, an entire division, was in that area on July 2nd and 3rd. It's because they discovered the Confederate cavalry scouring that area, trying to find ways to their wagon trains and ways to attack Culp's Hill. And it led to an entire division of Union cavalry being there to clog access lanes to the Baltimore Pike and the wagon trains, and much more. And give early tripwire alarm systems to an attack on Culp's Hill. The Union was just as active on the other side. Could do another program just as involved on Union intelligence. They were doing counterintelligence all during the fight. This is Brinkerhoff Ridge looking west. 35th was there. Brinkerhoff Ridge looking east. The 10th New York Cavalry marker is in the upper right corner of the screen. You can visit that today. And they were from Buffalo, New York. Bob, they were from Buffalo. And this part of the tour also, as I'm doing like a visual tour here, is just to show you parts of the battlefield you may or may not have seen. There's the 10th New York Cavalry marker up close. They would fight at Brinkerhoff Ridge along with the 3rd Pennsylvania Cavalry and the 1st New Jersey and Purnell's Maryland Legion against the 2nd Virginia of Stonewall's Brigade, Virginia Brigade. And this is a marker on Hoffman Road, just off of Hanover Road. And it's an area where there's a marker talking about the cavalry fight at Brinkerhoff Ridge on July the 2nd. And by the way, to understand why the cavalry battle occurred at East Cavalry Field, you have to understand Brinkerhoff Ridge. The reason why there was a fight at East Cavalry Field on July 3rd was the Southerners were trying to flank Benner's Hill, so it led them on a wider arc further east of Gettysburg. Brinkerhoff Ridge was a prelude to that. This is the E. Deerdorf house. It still stands. I heard it was for sale. And that's all along the area that I was showing you, mainly E. Deerdorf Lane. This is the E. Deerdorf barn. The foundation parts of it may be original. The 2nd Virginia skirmished there early in the morning against the 27th Indiana. This is east of Wolf Hill on July 2nd. Confederates were very active over there gathering information, and the Union was very active keeping them at bay. This is the E. Deerdorf barn. Wesley Culp may have skirmished here on July 2nd. Sue Boardman, one of her theories on where Wesley Culp was killed was on the Deerdorf farm, skirmishing the morning of the 2nd. This is E. Deerdorf Lane, what's left of it. Route 15 has cut through this part of the battlefield and halved it and separated it. There's the 16th Pennsylvania Cavalry. They would be stationed on E. Deerdorf Lane on July 3rd. The 9th the 9th Massachusetts Infantry was of Schweitzer's brigade under a Colonel Guinea was stationed there on July 2nd. So they missed the fighting in the wheat field because they were guarding the same area that the 16th Pennsylvania would guard on the 3rd. It's a strategic access point through Wolf Hill to the rebel flank at Benner's Hill. There's Wolf Hill in the background from the 16th Pennsylvania Cavalry marker. Now, Captain Frank Myers would write his account about how he reconnoitered, how he scouted, how he gathered information on July 2nd before the attack there. And he says, at dark, the troops encamped, and in the morning, the battalion, that's 35th Virginia Battalion, was broken up into scouting parties for the generals of the left wing. That would be Ewell and Johnson, Early. The colonel, that's White, sending Captain Myers and Grubb with 6 men each to find the right flank. That's Culp's Hill of the Yankees. They crossed the creek, that's Rock Creek, and separating, scouted through rough, broken country for probably 2 hours, when they united exactly in rear of the enemy's right wing and sent a courier to inform Colonel White's Comanches that they had found it. Myers, who wrote this account, said, having gone around the right flank while Grubb passed through an opening in the Union line without knowing it until he found himself in the Union rear. Here, that's Myers and Grubb, saw a long train of Union wagons and determined to capture some of them. But on arriving in about 200 yards of the train, found that a cavalry force had passed along in the rear. That's a Union cavalry force. I'll identify him in a minute. While a line of infantry was marching directly towards them. And from this interesting situation, they agreed to retire without wagons. That's his humor. If they could. It was a particular business, but by passing off for Yankee scouts, which Captain Grubb could do to perfection, they got clear, taking 5 prisoners with them. Now, some of you have been with me on the Samuel Johnson's reconnaissance of the Round Tops on July 2nd. They did something, the Southerners did something similar on the other flank. And Johnston, in scouting Round Top, said he only had about 5 men with him. And if you were with me on that walk, you may remember, just blurt out if you remember, why would you only take a small group of 5 or 6 men to do a scouting mission? Yeah, let's say you were to go in with 1,000 cavalrymen. Why would that not be a good idea? Yeah, the Union signal station on Powers Hill, Cemetery Hill, they would easily spot you through field glasses and what we would call telescope. A couple miles away, they would know you were coming. So you can get in closer and see without being seen in smaller groups. And like Samuel Johnston, who said that the goal of a scout is to see without being seen, he wouldn't have worn epaulets and things that would have given him away and made him an easy capture. Like the FBI and Homeland Security and CIA, they just sort of blend in with everybody. And so that's what Grubb had learned to do. Whether he put on a straw hat to look like local civilians or whether he put on a Union coat, he fooled some people on the Union side and captured them. And then they would question them. So they're gathering information. That's our focus here. White's Comanches split into 2 scouting parties of 6, taking from Captain Frank Myers' Companies A and E and Captain R.B. Grubb's Company C to investigate the environs of Culp. So this is all on the 2nd now before they even attack there. And routes were taken by White's Comanches in 2 parties of 6. The route divides in several places. Just briefly, you can see the Union line here. Here's Culp's Hill. Here's the E. Deardor Farm. This is Highland Avenue Road, Clapp Saddle Road. Some just salt of the earth people live in this area today. Bruce Stairs, Steve Kelly, Dean Schultz. How many of you know these fine people? Okay, so you want to work with him if you ever visit those areas. And Dean has gone out of his way, he and Judy Schultz, to buy up more and more land and put permanent scenic easements on there so that it'll never be developed. He's just doing incredible things over there. And he took the volunteers and myself around there this past summer. And he owns that land all around Lost Avenue. So this is the route, Clapp Saddle Road, likely taken by Grubb. And then Myers likely went around the outside and reached the Baltimore Pike. And they unified somewhere here. Powers Hill's right here, Callister Hill here. There's an old miniature golf course right here today. It's been, Battlefield Trust now owns it. And here's, Myers called it rough, broken country. You can definitely see why. That's what Wolf Hill looks like. Neal Avenue or Lost Avenue carved through Wolf Hill down to the footbridge. That's probably the route taken by Grubb's 6 men on horseback. There's the old McAllister Mill footbridge, as it looked in 1900 anyway. And Rock Creek near the footbridge is where 1 or more parties of 6 cavalrymen crossed along Rock Creek. Probably Grubb crossed here. His horses would have had to very carefully go across. This is the Rock Creek Bridge along Baltimore Pike. It's the only road bridge crossing of Rock Creek where cavalry could remain mounted and avoid deep water around the dams. That is, Grubb took the inside route, more direct, Clapp Saddle Road, whereas Myers took the outside route, and that allowed him to stay east of Rock Creek and never have to cross it until he reached the Rock Creek modern bridge there today. The Baker Farm is there today. That's where Dean and Judy Schultz live. And that's an important intersection, by the way. Later on, Union infantry would be placed there because it was a way for the rebels to get around the Union right flank without having to cross Rock Creek. called Highland Avenue Road. This is Spangler Meadow. Now going back to this account of Frank Myers, notice that a Union, I've highlighted this and I've underlined it, notice that a Union cavalry force had passed along in their rear and a line of infantry, Union infantry, marching directly towards them. Union cavalry referred to here was likely one of two companies of Buford's division, probably Company F of the 17th Pennsylvania Cavalry. If you take the guide exam, some of you know this, one of the things that that helps or hurts you when you take the guide exam, the oral part of it is, if you introduce someone into the story on your oral exam on the first day of the battle, you need to know where they were on the second and third day of the battle. They can't disappear. So if you know Buford fought on the first day west of Gettysburg, and you know that extensively, you need to know that they guarded the Peach Orchard on the second day, and that they guarded the area near that footbridge near the McAllister Dam at Rock Creek on July 2nd, that they escorted in the 5th Corps after their 58-mile march from Frederick along the Hanover Road. That's Joshua Chamberlain, everybody else. They guided them onto the battlefield. That was Buford. And then you need to know Buford went to Taneytown the evening of the 2nd, and that he was in Westminster guarding 4,000 tons of medical and food supplies via the Western Maryland Railroad on July 3rd. And again, he can't fall off a cliff after July 1. You need to know where they go. And so that's probably Company F, 17th Pennsylvania Cavalry, that Grube and Myers ran into. And the Union infantry they ran into that caused them to skedaddle was probably George Sears Green's New York Brigade marching from the Round Tops to Culp's Hill. They had been over in front of the Round Tops at the end of the first, backing up Buford there, and then they marched over after 3 a.m. to the right flank. This is a Jedediah Hotchkiss map, very rare map. Chuck Teague got this map for me once. He went down to the National Archives. He said, "Here, friend," he gave me a copy of it, and I have it framed in my office. But it shows a frozen moment in time from the rebel information gathering, intelligence gathering of the Union right flank. A moment in time from the evening of July 1st to around noon on July 2nd. Notice in the area of the Peach Orchard over here on your left, notice there's no intelligence over here. Notice that? Hotchkiss, who was the map maker for Ewell's Corps, has no awareness of anything in the way of sickles over here at this point. Proctor Smith and Samuel Johnston would do that intelligence gathering. And Hotchkiss at this point in time, when he did this map by noon on July 2nd, did not have that information of their Union left in front of the Round Tops. Notice Gregg's division of cavalry clogging all the access routes to the Baltimore Pike. The wagon trains, notice them right here. Isn't that incredible? Why do we have a wagon train on a rebel map? Because they knew the wagon trains were there. How did they know they were there? Because Grube and Myers made it there. Okay, and so they got to this point before Greene and the 17th Pennsylvania Cavalry shooed them away. Myers remembered a long train of wagons. Now, these are ambulances at City Point near Richmond in 1863. He saw a long train of wagons. There were 3,000 Union ambulances at Gettysburg, 300 artillery pieces, 300 at least additional ammunition and logistical wagons at Gettysburg. This image, get ready for this now. This image is of 300 Union wagons at Brandy Station, Virginia. 300. The Union Army had 3,000 ambulances alone near Powers Hill, about a mile south of here. Not 300 as is pictured. Try to times that by 10, and that's what Grube and Myers ran into. If you know, there's an old expression: experts study logistics, and amateurs study tactics. This is logistics. This is major. No wonder the Baltimore Pike, why the Culp's Hill was so important. This is what it protected. If that line had broken at any point, this is tragic. But the Confederates could have come in. You wound the lead horse. You fired their lead horse. Grube or Myers could have done this. Stewart's cavalry could have done this on July 3rd had they made it to the Baltimore Pike. There's 6 horses and mules per wheeled vehicle, 38,000 Union horses and mules, conservative estimates, with all the wagon trains there. Between there and Union Mills. 14 miles south, and then beyond there, 18 miles south of Gettysburg. And you reach those cavalry, you reach those wagon trains, you fire upon and wound the lead horse. The other 5 horses won't work in unison with a wounded horse. That means that wagon train is disabled. And then you set fire to the wagons. Could have been disaster had Culp's Hill fallen. The rebels could have just done limited damage to each wagon and created traffic jams and panics behind the lines. This is what Grube and Myers ran into. 10 times the number that you see there just for the ambulances. This is the William Payne map. This is from our museum here. I took a photograph in there. William Payne map, he was Meade's staff cartographer. He was very much like what Hotchkiss was for the rebels. And this is a map he did on July 2nd, evolving from 4 a.m. to 2 p.m. in concert with General Meade, the commanding general's orders. Notice Union cavalry at the footbridge across Rock Creek. That's probably Company F, 17th Pennsylvania Cavalry. The Union not only placed 17th PA Cav there after Grube and Myers crossed in the area, and we're not going to let them cross again, but then they placed eventually, some of you know that Green's brigade was placed there on the evening of July 2nd. He supposedly got lost. And then on July 3rd, Thomas Neal's brigade, Lost Avenue, was placed there. That's a strategic point. It gives access to the Baltimore Pike for the Southerners who would not have to cross Rock Creek until they reached the Pike and got to the bridge. This map was distributed to Captain Wilcox, 1st Corps Major General John Reynolds. It is a colorized facsimile of the William Payne map authorized by me to be distributed to the Federal Corps on July 2nd. Again, notice Union cavalry at the footbridge where probably Grube crossed and where he met up with Myers. A company of Federal cavalry guarded Federal trains along the Baltimore Pike south of Rock Creek. Okay. Now, last portion of the program. How are we doing with filming and the broadcast? Okay. Do we have another 10 minutes? Do we have 10 minutes? Okay, I'll do it in 10 minutes then. Johnson's skirmishers gathered intelligence from Culp's Hill. This is the last aspect of gathering information. Finally, Southerners gathered essential information from Major General Edward Allegheny Johnson's skirmish line in front of Culp's Hill. 25th, 5th, and 2nd Virginia skirmished across Rock Creek, gathering information about the strength, location, and morale of the Federal position at Culp's Hill. What do we mean about morale? I used to play sports, played high school basketball, high school football. Bob can certainly relate to this, being a high school official. And you say, well, how do you determine your opponent's morale? There are times when you can go in a game and the first few minutes you run back to the sideline from the field or from the court, and you get in a huddle and you tell the coach, they don't want to be here. They don't want to be here. You know, the other team doesn't want to be here. You know, be more assertive. They don't want to be here. You can end this game in the first quarter if you really press things. So skirmishers are out there to determine enemies' location. You want to know where they are before you attack. Their morale, if they're ready to fight, that's easy to learn. And then their strength, the numbers, so that you can attack with comparable numbers. So the 25th, 5th, and 2nd Virginia did that in front of Culp's Hill. Union skirmishers crossed Rock Creek to engage the 25th and 5th. Specifically, there were 300 Union skirmishers of the 28th Pennsylvania from the Pittsburgh area. And this was all going on at the base of Culp's Hill hours before the attack on July 2nd. This is a panorama of Wolf Hill on the left. It's my favorite view in the park. McAllister Hill, Powers Hill, and Culp's Hill. This is from Benner's Hill, where Johnson's troops would attack. Johnson's troops would attack on the 2nd with George Maryland Stewart's troops on the left. Williams Louisianans in the center, and then over on the far right, Jones Virginians. That's on July 2nd. Now look at the reports here. I want you to see the information gathering. I don't want to lose our focus here. What does Johnson's report tell us, the rebel commander's report? That his skirmishers were doing what? Ascertained, reported, information, communicated, received information. Skirmishing is less about rifle fire, more about gathering information. Wolf Hill from Benner's Hill. Okay? Let's just go over to Wolf Hill and let's climb it with the 2nd and 5th Virginia. There's John Popel on the far left. How many of you know John Popel? He's one of the volunteers in the park. He and I went over there with Craig Kaba and some other folks, and the Nott-Nagels who live over in that area, Sandy Nott-Nagel's husband took us up there, and they own the Rosensteel farm in Wolf Hill. And they took us up there and we walked Wolf Hill. Most people never make it up there. Again, look at Jones' report. He commanded 1/3 of Johnson's attack. And he says, we watched the motions of the enemy. So they got down close enough to Culp's Hill they could watch the motion. Gathering information. Maryland Stewart writes in his report, he commanded Marylanders, North Carolinians, and Virginians 300 yards in front of our line. Enemy was strongly entrenched. The Southerners knew the Union was entrenched on Culp's Hill. That was not a surprise. Why? Because skirmishers found out this information. Taking some few prisoners, says Colonel Nadenbosch. Well, when you capture a prisoner, you ask questions. Colonel Funk of the 5th Virginia said that we moved in direction of Wolf Mountain. He also called it Red Hill, where the enemy had taken refuge. There's Wolf Mountain, where the 5th Virginia advanced to skirmish with the 9th Massachusetts there on picket duty. What a great view on Wolf Hill, looking from there 600 feet above sea level down towards Benner's Hill, where the rebels would attack from. This is the rough ground the 2nd Virginia skirmishers pushed through the night of July 1st to fill the vacuum between them and the 27th Indiana to ascertain Federal strength, location, and morale around Culp's Hill. It's the night of the 1st. Look at this incredible view that we got from the top of Wolf Hill. There's the visitor center. And another view, and you can see Round Tops off to the left. From Wolf Hill. This is interesting. This is Meade's addendum report. The commanding general of the Union Army wrote an addendum report in addition to his original report on February 25th, 1864 to Henry Halleck, requesting, it's all related to an update on Thomas Ruger's report. And herein Meade, watch this is incredible information. Herein Meade credited the timing of Confederate Commander Johnson's July 2nd attack against Culp's Hill with perceiving the withdrawal of our troops. That's what Meade wrote. Talk about gathering information. The enemy, perceiving the withdrawal of our troops, advanced and attacked General Greene. That's Pap Greene. So the timing of the rebel attack on Culp's Hill was related to seeing 300 skirmishers of the 28th Pennsylvania suddenly withdraw from their front across Rock Creek. They had been told to look for an opportunity. Skirmishers are 1/10 of your force. So if you have 300 skirmishers, the rebels could do quick math. If the Union and the 28th Pennsylvania had 300 skirmishers, how many troops are they shielding and masking? 3,000. So you know that we don't know Candy and Kane brigades by name, but you know that 3,000 men are withdrawing from your front. Why? Because 300 skirmishers withdrew from your front. Where were they going? To help out Sickles on the far left. They never made it there, but they made it to that footbridge. I don't think it's a coincidence. Union skirmishers at the base of Culp's Hill served an early warning signal that the main attack was approaching. That's, by the way, that's why the fight occurred where it did. The reason Pap Greene stayed and fought at Culp's Hill, even though he was ordered to go over towards the Round Tops to help Sickles, is because his skirmishers, the 60th New York and the 78th New York, 102nd New York, 137th New York, detected on their skirmish line Johnson's main body approaching and waiting across Rock Creek to attack. And Greene said to Geary, "Can I stay here?" And Geary said, "Yeah, you can stay here." And then Hancock started shifting troops over the 71st Pennsylvania. And soon the 106th Pennsylvania came over. They started moving furniture around to protect the hill from those that had vacated to help Sickles over on the other flank. All right, this is our conclusion. Why did Lee assault Culp's Hill? Attacking Culp's Hill threatened the primary tactical objective of Cemetery Hill from the east, even as the main Confederate attacks up the Emmitsburg Road pressured it from the west towards a pincer at the bend in the Fishhook, Cemetery Hill. Lee intended critical mass from two directions on Cemetery Hill to force a Federal retreat south along the Baltimore Pike. Attacking Culp's Hill also offered the equal advantage of fighting in the woods, an advantage for both armies towards sustained action. Why did the fighting on Culp's Hill last 12 hours? Here's your answer. Clausewitz writes, but we must not overlook the fact that a forest may hide the enemy. If we conceal ourselves in it, this disadvantage affects both sides. The reason why the Cemetery Ridge and Cemetery Hill were the main positions, you could see Pickett's charge a mile away. That's the position you want. You don't want foliage in front of you. You don't want your enemy to sneak up on you. Culp's Hill had a lot of nooks and crannies and blindside accesses to the tops. And you had to use up a lot of men inefficiently to cover blindside access to the top of the hill. Remember, Jomini said, be wary of defending a wooded hill. You can be surrounded and not even know it. So Culp's Hill, that's why the Southerners, where they were able to ensconce behind rocks and trees and stay there for 12 hours. It could only stay 15 minutes within firing range of with Pickett's charge. But they could stay forever in Culp's Hill and pressure the wagon trains and the Baltimore Pike and the way of escape. The Southern Army did indeed scout Culp's Hill proper and the greater Union right flank. Information gathering began 5 months earlier when Hotchkiss first visited Gettysburg. Jubal Early and White's Comanches added to this knowledge on June 26. And Lee climbed the almshouse cupola. These are all ways in review that we've talked about of gathering information. On July 2nd, Southerners fine-tuned their information gathering to specific places such as Little Round Top and Culp's Hill. Similar to Samuel Johnson's July 2nd morning reconnaissance along the Union left to Round Top, a committee of lesser-known scouts did the same from the evening of July 1 to the morning of July 2nd on and around Culp's Hill. The committee included lesser-known participants of the battle, Lieutenant Turner, Early, that's Robert Early. Johnson sent a scouting party of 20 plus, most of them were captured. 2 or 3 escapees found that the 5th Corps was only 4 miles from the battlefield of Bonneville. This is all information gathering in relation to our subject here. Summary conclusion, although the Confederate commander Edward Johnson facing Culp's Hill, although his scouting party determined that Lee would not attack Culp's Hill on July 1 and it informed the location of unassailable approaches to Culp's Hill that Johnson's division avoided on July 2nd. Why did the Southerners attack the more gentle slopes of Culp's Hill and not the steep slopes? Why the eastern face and not the northern slopes? Their scouts learned where to attack and that information. That's why Johnson found where he was supposed to attack on July 2nd. Lastly, it revealed the Union 5th Corps resting on Ewell's flank. And then we mentioned that both Myers and Grubb reconnoitered Culp's Hill on the morning of the 2nd. Finally, the Committee of Lesser-Known Information Gatherers included the 25th, 5th, and 2nd Virginia skirmishers who performed basic skirmish functions of determining Union strength and morale. That concludes Culp's Hill intelligence gathering. Thank you for coming out today. Now I'll go over to Culp's Hill and Benner's Hill and walk the area.
That's very nice of you to say that, Troy. Thank you very much.
I mean it.
I know you do. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I'll be back.
Need a Corps badge or other insignia for your uniform? Then check out the Badge Maker. Here's what some of his satisfied customers had to say. Miranda said, I ordered an identification disc from Joe and it's fantastic. He hand-stamped it exactly as I wanted. Greg said, my unit has purchased from him in the past quality badges and good service. And Jerry S. says, the Badge Maker is the go-to place for accurate replica Civil War badges. So go to CivilWarCorpsBadges.com and attach a message with your order saying you heard about him on Addressing Gettysburg.
Our hearts so stout have got us fame, for soon 'tis known from whence we came. Wherever we go, they dread the name of Garryowen in glory. Instead, spot will drink down ale and pay the reckoning on the nail. No man for debt shall go to jail from Garryowen in glory. Instead, spot will drink down ale and pay the reckoning on the nail. No man for debt shall go to jail from Garryowen in glory.